Stacy, Dr. Stacy Brown, she got her bachelor's degree from UT Chattanooga in chemistry. Is that right? And then she then turned to get her PhD in pharmaceuticals and biomedical sciences, University of Georgia College of Pharmacy. And you should see she has a very impressive long list of publications and presentations. And after I think she got her PhD, she worked with some of the private labs and companies before she joined Bill Gatton College of Pharmacy in 2007. And what is remarkable, she's going to, her talk, I don't give out everything, but I know it is going to be focused around teaching strategy and all. But we cannot get better person than Stacy. If you look at her CV, she has been here since 2007 at College of Pharmacy. She is a recipient of Outstanding Teaching Award since then, except unfortunately 2 years, 10 and 11, she didn't receive it. However, she actually got Service and Research Award on those 2 years. Wow. So since 12, 13, 14 in a row, okay? And before that, 8, 9, and then 10 and 11. See, I already memorized her CV actually. So
good job, Dr. Zuckerberg.
So, without wasting any more time, I'll give platform to Dr. Stacy Brown. Stacy, thank you so much for it.
Thank you very much. Now, just to be fair, those early years at the College of Pharmacy, we didn't have a whole lot of faculty, so there wasn't too many to choose from. Anyway, I appreciate the introduction. When Ranjan first asked me to come here today, I was going to make this joke about how, well, I know you just came for the free lunch, but then I see that you were supposed to bring your lunch, and so I guess it's still a joke. But anyway, I appreciate you taking your time out of your Friday to join me today. I wanted to start with a little bit of autobiographical information to give some context of what some of the things I'm going to be talking about, where that comes from, and then tell you a little bit about how I got into teaching the way I do, which I use a strategy called POGLE, Process-Oriented Guided Inquiry Learning. This talk actually was originally put together for the Southeast Regional POGLE meeting this summer, and so I was addressing a group of college, high school faculty who were just getting into teaching this way, and I was trying to be encouraging to them, so hopefully the same message will come across to you. And then I've done some scholarship of teaching work at ETSU. It's not really my specialty, but because of the way I teach, that lends itself to some unique, looking at some unique effects of teaching that way, and especially in pharmacy education, there hadn't been a lot done when I first started teaching in pharmacy. And then talk a little bit about the future direction as far as teaching and learning strategies, especially as it applies to accreditation, because that's something that our college has its eye on right now as we're coming up for a visit in the next year and a half. So I'll start with my first academic appointment, and this was at the Citadel, which is a military college in Charleston, South Carolina. This is what all the buildings look like, and this is how all the students really dress to come to class every day. And they do sometimes bring rifles, and it's very unusual, but you get used to it fairly quickly. I was surprised, actually, how quickly I got accustomed to seeing M16s come in the chemistry lab. And I started this job 6 days after I graduated from UGA. And by started, I mean I stepped into the classroom for the very first time, August 21st, and I had graduated on August the 15th. And I was teaching a course creatively named Chemistry for Non-Science Majors. So we had all the non-chemistry people in there because the Citadel had a 2-year science requirement. So these were kids that were just trying to get one of their sciences out of the way. And being a small school, we only had 3 choices for science: chemistry, biology, and physics. So I was teaching a couple sections of this and several labs, because you have to give a lab to everybody. So a couple hundred students and the perfect classroom. At least I thought it was fine at the time. It was a big raked auditorium. I had a chalkboard and a book. And I was ready. That's all you need to teach, right? That's what I thought. And so that's what I did. I started preparing lots of lectures and doing lots of examples and giving lots of homework and doing exactly what I was taught to do as a student, because this is what I experienced, so it must be awesome, right? And so I started teaching my course, and I thought it was going well. The students seemed to be happy with me. They were doing okay on my tests. And the end of the semester came, and the department had assembled a course-wide assessment because there were several instructors in the same course. And so everybody took the same final. And my students almost all failed. They scored in the 40th percentile while all the other instructors were in the 70s. And I was devastated. The majority of the class even got the question about the formula for water wrong. And I said, what have you been doing, Stacy, all semester? And they can't even figure out H2O in the end. And so I was in a serious funk about this, and I started looking for other jobs, thinking, well, I'm obviously not supposed to be teaching. This is a mistake. So maybe I'll apply for a pharmaceutical industry job. That's where all my friends were working anyway, and they had nice cars, and I didn't. So I said, all right, that's what I should do. But then when I started looking at some of these jobs, I was like, oh, I don't want to do that every day. So I was faced with continuing my teaching job at the Citadel, which I plotted through that spring semester and had about the same result at the end. So feeling very down by the end of my first teaching year, and I said, all right, I need to overhaul my course. I need to do something new. And so I did. I moved to a room that had PowerPoint, and I made PowerPoint slides for all of my lectures. And my department chair at the time was floored by this. He was like, wow, I love your technology skills, because my slides were amazing. There was like animation and the zooming bullets and everything you could want in a PowerPoint. So I was like, this is going to cure it. It's going to be great. And so the students loved it. It was something a little different, a little more entertaining perhaps, because I put little videos in there and things like that. But at the end, they still did really badly on that assessment. In fact, they were getting worse. So I was making them worse than they were before. Yes, sir.
Stacy, Dr. Brown, rather, did it occur to you that they were just probably giving you the hardest students to teach because you were the new person?
Well,
it was like a Citadel hazing.
I don't know about that. I did usually, because the athletes were allowed to sign up first. The first year, I got the very last people to sign up because they didn't know what this person was. But then after that, I got the first people to sign up. So I was getting the more senior students and the athletes, and, it didn't seem to matter. Okay. But no, that never occurred to me, although they did tend to have some hazing tendencies toward new faculty, too. So it's not a complete joke. There's a little bit of reality to that. So. But no, I don't think it was the students. It never occurred to me to blame them. I kept looking at myself and saying, what's wrong with these beautiful PowerPoints? They're not working. Oh, my goodness. So at the end of this third semester, my department chair and some of the senior faculty in the department strongly encouraged me to attend a faculty development session. Now, I did not know what faculty development was. But I knew what strongly encouraged meant for a new assistant professor. So I went to it. It was a 3-day workshop conducted by Dr. Ron Paul, who's kind of I now know is a world-renowned researcher in critical thinking and promoting critical thinking. And they sort of sold it as, well, it's our QEP right now that we're working on critical thinking. So you should go to this so you can learn critical thinking teaching. But in the end, I knew it was because my students were doing terrible. So I went to the faculty development workshop, and Dr. Paul presented some data from the 1970s and the 1980s. And at first I was like, why are you presenting such old data? Surely there is newer data. But it didn't matter because the data was very compelling, and then it showed that students' attention span is about 10 minutes. And if you have a really interested, well-rested, well-fed student, they can probably go about 18 minutes. But when it's all said and done, they really remember the first few things that happened during class. So whatever's in the first, 5 to 10 minutes, that's what they remember. The rest is lost. And I said, oh my gosh, what have I done? I sat there in the workshop and I calculated how many minutes a week I was wasting with my students, how many hours that is per semester, how many dollars that translates into tuition. This is what I was wasting by doing the course the way I was doing it. And so I said, all right, think of another way to do it, because I can't just do PowerPoint every day and hope that things are going to work, because they obviously were not working. And so I started searching for something, and that led me to a regional American Chemical Society meeting, the Southeast Region meeting. That year was in Memphis, Tennessee, and we had these little faculty development grants. And so I wrote a little grant so that I could get some airfare to fly out to Memphis and go to a POGLE workshop, process-oriented guided inquiry learning. Some of the guys who originally developed this teaching strategy are on the book that I bought here. It was in the second edition at the time. I think it's like in the 10th or 11th now, but they sort of revealed to me a new way to think about teaching, a new way that was very different from what I'd experienced as a student. And so I bought their book, which had some guided inquiry exercises for general chemistry, and I modified them to bring them to the level that my students needed, because I wasn't teaching chemistry majors. And I started using them in my classroom, and it caught on just like that. It was like a flip this switch. Now, they didn't love it at first. They were uncomfortable with it. Part of that is because I was doing something different, and part of it is because at the Citadel, the students have rank, and in the POGLE model, you assemble these groups, and you rotate who's in the leadership role. So if the senior level student was not in the leadership role, and the freshman was supposed to be in leadership, sometimes that caused a little problem, but for the most part, they did okay with it, and their scores on that final just shot up into the 80th percentile the first year, and continued for the next couple of semesters like that. So I was really excited. Now, I don't know if you know anything about the Citadel, but they don't love things that are different. They kind of like things to stay the same since 1842. So I got a little bit of pushback from my chair and from other people in the college, like, whoa, slow down, what are you doing? But still, I just said, well, they're doing okay now. The students are learning something, and I feel good about it. And it kind of, my philosophy sort of changed from assigning a lot of homework assignments to focusing on just the time I had them in the classroom, because that's the time I could control. When they went back to their barracks, I didn't know what was happening to them. I didn't know if they had any time to study, if they had any peace. I knew that the doors didn't have a lock on them. I knew that the freshmen were bothered all times of the night. So I just didn't know. I can't control that, but I can control the hour on Monday, Wednesday, Friday that I had them. And so I shifted my focus away from doing homework and said, we're going to learn it all in here, and you don't need to worry about it outside of these walls. And, of course, they liked that, too. And so this led me to sort of think about other jobs, because I was getting, the environment wasn't entirely receptive to teaching in a different way. And also, I was just interested in getting back to pharmacy. That's where my PhD work was done. And so I'd kept my eye on the College of Pharmacy here, and the department chair contacted me, David Rohn contacted me, and because I expressed some interest and said, look, we're accepting applications. And I joined the first big group of faculty in 2007 to start at the College of Pharmacy. When I started, this is what our building looked like. They even took us for a tour, and it was like a big dirt pit, trying to show us all this stuff. And I was like, please don't show people this. Just wait till you build it. But anyway, I started in 2007, and I was hired to teach medicinal chemistry to our second-year students. I never taught medicinal chemistry before, but I figured, how different can it be? And so I started prepping for that, and I was excited to bring POGLE to the pharmacy curriculum. And I didn't know at the time that active learning in general was becoming really a a real focal point in pharmacy education. There's been a pharmacy education journal for many years, but it was just in the early 2000s that you were starting to see some papers about using active learning, things like POGL, not specifically POGL, but things like that, in the pharmacy environment. And there are several reasons for this. First and foremost, the knowledge base in pharmacy and really any health science field is changing exponentially. I mean, just if you talk about new drugs, there were 29 in 2013. So does that mean that I need to expand my medchem class by 29 drugs, and the next year 29 more drugs, and the next year 29 drugs, and by the time I retire, it'll be 1,000 of drugs, and how long is that course going to take if you have to talk about every single one of those? And so the idea is that you, even though your knowledge base is changing, you teach the students to become lifelong learners, to be able to identify those new medications and those new concepts that they need to learn on their own. And so that's kind of the idea with using active learning in the pharmacy education setting. But then others had shown that students who come from a more active type curriculum do better in their pharmacy practice experiences in the fourth year. So we have 3 years of a didactic curriculum. In the fourth year, they rotate through several clerkships. And those students tended to do better if they had a lot of active learning stuff in the classroom, because they could find the knowledge, they could process it, they can analyze it, and they can interact with their healthcare team a little bit better. And then as an outside influence, the accreditation body for pharmacy was starting to think about active learning and say, yeah, you might want to look at this element in your curriculum. So since 2007, they've had some language in the accreditation standards about active learning. So when I started in 2007, I wasn't all that familiar with what people did in pharmacy education as far as active learning goes. I'd started to really get a grasp on what people did in chemistry education, which was actually quite extensive. So I said, well, what are they doing in pharmacy? And so I synced up with a couple of other like-minded new people, try to figure out what kind of research project could we do with absolutely no resources and no lab. And so we said we could do a survey, and that's what we did. We put together a survey for faculty in colleges of pharmacy across the country, which at the time was 2013 individuals, and we got a 64% response rate overall, but 95% of the colleges were represented in their response. And what we wanted to know is just get a kind of an overview of what kind of active learning strategies faculty were using, and then how much of their teaching was really incorporating active learning. And so this is kind of our main thing that we wanted to learn. What kind of strategies are used in colleges of pharmacy? And I was looking for a little pen. Do you have a pen that attaches to this?
It's on the top.
I should have done this before we started the recording. Oh, well. Okay. So not surprisingly, problem-based and case-based learning was at the top of the list. The pen has a little mind of its own there. And I don't know, we really didn't know anything about making a survey, so I don't know why we didn't separate those two out, but nevertheless, they were the top response. And that's not surprising. First of all, case-based learning, very popular in medical education, easy to do. Make up a patient, make up some symptoms, boom, you're good to go. Problem-based learning, late 90s, early 2000s, several pharmacy schools were just adopting an entire curriculum based on problem-based learning. Auburn University was one of the first to do that, and so that's not surprising that a lot of faculty were using those strategies, and then some other ones that we already were using at the College of Pharmacy, including of course labs, patient simulation, the clickers, and then now we use some team-based learning. But not a lot of people were using POGL and inquiry-based learning, which is what I like. So I said, oh, it's my job to bring more. Now, this was our main objective of this survey, but we decided we did collect some demographic data, and we learned a few interesting things about who does active learning. We learned that assistant professors were almost twice as likely as full professors to do active learning in pharmacy ed. And this is probably because as these strategies have trickled into pharmacy education, it's these individuals, the newer faculty, that are more likely to have seen that in their education. So we tend to, as faculty, mimic how we were taught. That's what I did. And so that's probably what these newer faculty do. And we've seen that in our hiring at the college, that some of our newer faculty already come in with some ideas and some enthusiasm for active learning. Also, not surprising, our clinical departments and the departments that teach things like pharmacy, law, or different aspects of the social sciences are more likely to do active learning, 3.5 times more likely than basic science or pharmaceutical science people. And that's not surprising for me. First of all, it's a little bit easier from the clinical side to make up problem-based exercises and case-based exercises. But also, these are pharmacists. These individuals have PharmDs, and they've come from pharmacy programs where they're more likely to have seen the active learning type stuff. Whereas these folks come from all over. It's just from chemistry and biology and biochemistry and all sorts of different backgrounds. So there's not as much uniformity in the type of experience they might have had. And then the teaching load effect was quite striking to us, because we saw that if you had a teaching load of over 80%, you were 6 times more likely than somebody on the other end of the continuum to use active learning, which says that if you're teaching a lot, you figured out a way to do this more efficiently, because I can't imagine if I had 80% of my job as teaching, lecturing that whole time, lecturing 80% of my week, holy cow, I would not have a voice. Whereas now when I teach, I don't actually talk any. That's kind of nice. But anyway, that was interesting to us, that the more teaching load an individual had, the more likely they were to do that, to teach, to use some active learning strategies. So then that sort of led into my second project with my medicinal chemistry course, where I had introduced POGL exercises to my med chem students and started to use that to teach medicinal chemistry. And unfortunately, the first time I taught it, I didn't have time to do that. There weren't med chem exercises available that were POGL based. I mean, there was one little workbook that was a case based thing, but it was really, really advanced, probably for a PhD level student. So it was a similar scenario when I started at the Citadel, where I came on board and then, oh yeah, classes are starting on Monday. So I just had to turn around and figure out a way to cover the material very quickly. So I did this through lecture in the first semester that I taught. In the second couple of semesters, I started using POGL. So by 2008, I developed 21 exercises. By 2009, I developed 28 with the goal of doing a POGL exercise every single time the class met. So that was where I was going. What I set out to do then, looking back, was compare these groups and say, does that make any difference? Our students, they all had passed the course eventually, so you couldn't really look at the DFW rate, because for the most part, our students passed their courses. I mean, there's all this admission stuff, so you would expect that would happen. And so I wanted to see, well, is there any difference in the POGL and the non-POGL groups? And I put some of these numbers up here, GPA and our PCAT, that's our entrance exam, because I just want to highlight how awesome it is to do research in the College of Pharmacy with these students, because they're all the same. Every cohort is about the same size, and there's no difference in each group. And so you can't say, well, that was a stronger group that year. No, they're all the same. And we did the statistics to verify that. And you can extend this out now all the way to, our current admissions cycle, and it'd still be the same. So I compared my POGL groups with my lecture groups, and the lecture group there is in blue, fall of 2007. And what I ended up looking at was the exam average. So I did 4 exams and a final, cumulative final. And what I saw is that when I switched to teaching using the POGL method, my grade distribution shifted from an BC distribution to an AB distribution. So most of my grades in the fall of 2007 were B's or C's, and then we shifted that up a notch in the next couple of semesters with a lot more A's, especially moving forward. And then I eliminated some of my D's down here. I had I think I had 5 D's here, and I just had 1 each of those semesters. So I was increasing the success of the students, and this is not as striking as some of the POGL data that you see from undergrad, where they're looking at the DFW rate versus a passing rate. But these students, it's hard to affect change in these students because they're already going to succeed. I don't know what our statistic is, 96% of our students are going to succeed. And so to change at all their exam performance was very significant. Also significant was their feedback. I promise I didn't write these comments. These are cut and pasted from some SAIs. I use the term in-class exercise to talk about my POGL exercises, just so I don't have to explain what POGL is. I just sort of trick them into doing it. And so they were very positive about these experiences, saying they were the key to their understanding. They were challenged to use higher level thinking, more effective than listening to lecture, which is good because I got tired of doing that. And it wasn't easy. So they weren't doing well because it was an easy course. It was challenging, but they were feeling comfortable with it because of the way it was being taught. So that was very exciting to me. And if I had to do it over again, I would try to do better with that first group instead of having an all-lecture group in light of a new paper that actually came out this summer in, let's see here, what is that in? PNAS, where they did a meta-analysis of several scholarship of teaching studies that compared lecture versus some kind of active learning strategy. And across the board, using active learning improved student scores by at least 6%. Students that were in an active learning section of a course were 1.5 times more likely to pass. Or I guess the people in the traditional lecture were 1.5 times more likely to fail the course, And this was effective on all class sizes. It didn't matter if you were in a tiny little one-on-one type class or you were in a huge lecture class. It mattered. It made no difference. It was effective across the board. And so the authors of this paper kind of equate, they say, these are all good studies, but in the next generation of scholarship of teaching work, we need to say this strategy versus this strategy and leave lecture out of it, because he equates it to placebo, a placebo drug when you have a treatment that works. And so I thought that was a very powerful message that, we now consider it unethical to give a placebo to a patient when we have a therapy that we know works. They don't do that in clinical trials anymore. And so is this the same kind of thing in our research on scholarship of teaching? So kind of with that in mind, we'll look at another study that we did with case-based teaching. So I don't just do POGL. Have tried to adopt a couple of other strategies to teach. And this was a project where we looked at an elective, toxicology elective, that was taught completely by using case studies. So the format of the course was come in, I will orient you a few minutes to metal toxicity or beta blocker toxicity or whatever we're talking about. We'll look at some patient cases. We'll debate them and figure them out, and then at the end we'll put some points on the board and kind of wrap up. So that was the structure of this course. And I started hearing from my students in the course that, man, this course is fine, this course is good, but it's really helping me in these other classes. And I was like, really? Ooh, this is a research project. So I decided over a couple-year period to look at the students who had taken the toxicology elective versus those who hadn't. So those who signed up for some other elective, and they get a choice. It's not where I get this group of students or this class of students. It's a mix of second and third year students, and they get a choice what elective they want. And I compared those students on with their performance on our pharmacy curriculum outcomes assessment. It's kind of a standardized test. Some schools use it as a pre-clerkship type of test. So I compared their scores on that with the toxicology section of that, and then I compared their exam averages in a couple of courses that had some overlap with toxicology. So Pharmacology 3, which was a science course, and Pharmacotherapy 2, which was a clinical course. And we found that the students that did the toxicology elective, even 2 years later, did better on that section of the PCOA than those who hadn't had the elective. The national average on the toxicology section is about 70. So those in the elective had way surpassed that, and those who hadn't had the elective were falling a little bit short of the national average. As far as their impact in the other courses, no difference in the basic science course, so about the same statistically. No difference in the pharmacology 3 course average, but in therapy there was a difference in the students who had the elective. And we thought, there is a little bit of content overlap, but part of that is probably because they're learning a skill. They're learning a skill about examining patient cases and picking out pertinent information. And that was a skill they were being asked to do in pharmacotherapy too, but they were getting more practice with that particular skill in my class. So this is kind of thinking along the vein of integrating things from the basic science and from the clinical sciences. And that leads me to something I was chatting about a little bit before we started today, our college's plan for curricular integration. We are in the process of syncing up our basic and clinical sciences in a more deliberate way so that you don't get a year of pharmacology and then you never talk about it again. You're always talking about the fundamental sciences as well as how those are applied in clinic. And so we've tried to work through that over the last couple of years, and we're kind of in the middle of it right now. And when we first made our plans for curricular integration, we said, all right, what does this mean? Does this mean we just shuffle around when we teach stuff? Is it the same thing, but we just put it in a different order? And honestly, that's mostly what we've done so far. We just have to get through it one time and then see what happens. But in that exercise, we've started talking a lot more about active learning. And some faculty have said, well, we need to adopt a strategy, and everybody does that. And others have said, oh, no, we will not do that. I will not be told how to teach. But I think somewhere in the middle is probably a good approach where we all start to become mindful of other ways we can teach, as well as doing things that we're comfortable with. There's nothing wrong with that, but incorporating some newer strategies, some, I guess, more contemporary teaching strategies might be useful for our students, because we have plenty of data now that says, yeah, this is probably a good and effective thing to do. And then on top of that, we have accreditation. And everybody wants to stay accredited. You have to pay attention to what those agencies say. And this is a statement from the standards that our accreditation body, ACPE, they're working on drafting some new standards. So these are called Standards 2016. But currently, this is the language pertaining to teaching and learning, where they specifically mention active learning. They specifically mention collaborative learning, where you're working in a group. And as you know, when you reply to accreditation standards, you have to give some evidence that, yes, I'm meeting the standard. And so this is something that sort of codified the importance of active learning in pharmacy education. And so we're trying to pay attention to those 2016 standards. We don't have to be compliant right now, but this is pushing some of our faculty that maybe hadn't considered active learning before to start thinking about it. And so where do we go from here? What is next? I sort of think that the accreditation requirement for active learning is going to be coming along the same vein as interprofessional education, where the type of pharmacist that we need right now is very different from the pharmacists we needed 30 years ago. The pharmacist today participates in a healthcare team, and so we're trying to promote interprofessional education because that's a different kind of professional than the previous generation. And that as being part of that healthcare team, they have to interact in a group, and they have to assume leadership roles sometimes, and they have to retrieve and analyze information. And not all the information they'll use in their profession will be something that they covered during a class in pharmacy school. So trying to create that professional that that we need for 2014 and moving forward. I think that the accreditation agencies are kind of helping us push that. And then just sort of thinking about where else I use active learning, and I do this a lot with my research students because, first of all, I don't know what the answer is going to be, but what I have to do is help them get some confidence in retrieving information, analyzing it, applying it so they can try to solve a problem in the lab. And this is a great example of guided inquiry learning. It's a one-on-one relationship, which is a little different than what you have in the classroom, but it doesn't mean you can't take that strategy from your lab mentor relationship and take it into the classroom. You're still trying to teach those same students to process information and to analyze it and to come to a conclusion, even though in the classroom, hopefully, you know what the answer is in the end. And just encourage a little bit different thinking. This is something I push up against with some of my fellow pharmaceutical science faculty. It's not an either-or thing. You don't have to be the teacher or the researcher. You can be both, and that doesn't mean that your research is in the scholarship of teaching. It just means that you can excel in both areas. It's not an either-or kind of scenario. So anyway, I think that's all I have. All right, that's all I have. What questions do you have?
That's good.
Yes, sir.
Has anyone studied what factors can help faculty become more comfortable with active learning?
You know, I don't know if anybody's studied that. I think that it's a combination of personality. Some people are just more comfortable with letting go of control, because that's kind of what happens when you turn your classroom into a guided inquiry class, is you don't know always what direction it's going to go. And then faculty development. So because you don't usually, as a college faculty, you don't usually get a lot of training in how to teach things. We just sort of come out of our area of specialty and boom, now we're in charge of teaching. So this is, I think, the faculty development side of it, where you can go and learn about POGL or go and learn about case-based teaching or whatever it is, learn not just what it is, but how to run that classroom facilitation. So I think it's a dual advantage, personality and then the training. But I don't know if anyone studied that.
So I have actually two questions. One is extension of what Randy asked. Actually. First is, what difference do you see between, have you heard of the flipped classes now? They're becoming very popular, and POGL? Because I do not have really detailed knowledge of how to actually approach POGL method for subjects which are content-wise so different in different fields. So that is related to Randy's question, that are there specific books or training workshops which are available to faculty who can really see how these things are done and how those strategies can be applied to their own field,
for their own area.
Well,
for POGL, I know that they do a lot of workshops throughout the year through the POGL project, which of course originated from a National Science Foundation projects. And I've attended a couple of those workshops, and in one of them that was a multi-day thing, they actually simulated a classroom. So the facilitators, we were the students, and they showed us how that classroom was supposed to work. But as far as helping you with turning your content area into POGL, I think that what they do, the way they approach that, is sync you up with other people in the field. So if you're microbiology, there's somebody else out there doing that, and they help you make those connections so that you can share resources and things like that. POGL versus the flipped classroom, the idea with the flipped classroom is that you do pre-work. So you're assigned reading, but it's guided in some way. It's not just read chapter 20 and get the important information out. It's read chapter 20 and make sure you can address these key points, or make sure you can address these learning objectives. So there's some pre-work with some guidance to that. And then when you come into the class, you're expected to immediately apply that. So I don't know the structure of a flipped classroom exercise once they get into class. There's no real formula for that, but for POGL exercise, it is a bit more formulaic. Some of our faculty are doing the flipped classroom. Some of our pharmacy practice faculty who want to just discuss patient cases and they don't want to tell you any of the background, they've been doing the flipped classroom. And it took a while to catch on because the students, I'm not saying anything about our students because I was this way. As a student, they see, oh, I'm supposed to read this chapter. That means I don't have any homework. They weren't pre-reading. That's what they were accustomed to. They'd gotten away with not doing that forever, so why start doing it now? And they were shocked. Then when they got into class, we're like, oh, I was supposed to know that. Oh, there's a quiz to start out. Holy cow! So it took a little while to catch on, and it took those faculty ignoring the negativity that started at the beginning, where the students were just complaining like crazy. So. We have more faculty now that are doing the flipped classroom to the point that Academic Affairs has started to oversee it a little bit just to make sure that the students aren't overloaded any given night. Does that make sense? So, if you have three classes that are doing the flipped classroom, can we stagger the assignments? And, because we're self-contained, it's easy to do that.
Because I know I have a friend at Virginia Tech. They are big on right now flipped class implementation. So
they're doing that. They the biochemistry course for medicine. They've converted that to a flipped classroom. Dr. Medicinal was telling me all about it the other day, and I said, "Ooh, that sounds awesome." And he was like, "Well, it's a lot of work."
yes.
I was like, "Well, maybe after you do it a couple times, it won't be as much work." And he's like, "Well, we'll see." But apparently, it seems to be going really well. So he said that the problem before is that they weren't having good attendance. Nobody was coming, and because they could just get what they wanted out of the book. And so now they have this added value to the class time that they didn't have before.
Thank you.
How do you find you interact with the small groups? Do you find that you become more directive, or do you let them come completely to you and I have this question, or how do you find your interaction within the class once they're in groups working on the activity goes?
I usually wander around and eavesdrop on them, and some of them will raise their hand and draw my attention, but I just wander around, and then if I hear someone going way off on a tangent, I'll stop, and I usually ask them, now, why do you think that? Well, do you agree? Well, why don't you agree? Oh, well, you should listen to her. I think she's going in the right direction. So I just try to mediate it a little bit, but I try not to ever give them any answers, and that is really hard to do. First of all, you just want to get through it. You're looking at the clock and being like, all right, in the next 30 minutes, we have to be through this, and y'all are still on page 1. So just try to interact with them and make sure that they know that you're available, but that you're not gonna spill your guts and give them everything. So and that's something that you have to learn through practice. I wasn't very good at it at first. So. Question. Well, this is my cue to stop the recording, right? Well, thank you.